The Meritocracy Trap: How America's Foundational Myth Feeds Inequality, Dismantles the Middle Class, and Devours the Elite, by Daniel Markovits. Introduction. Merit is a sham. An entire civilization resists this conclusion. Every decent person agrees that advantage should be earned through ability and effort rather than inherited alongside caste. The meritocratic ideal, that social and economic rewards should track achievement rather than breeding, anchors the self-image of the age. Aristocracy has had its day, and meritocracy is now a basic tenet of civil religion in all advanced societies. Meritocracy promises to promote equality and opportunity by opening a previously hereditary elite to outsiders armed with nothing save their own talents and ambitions. It further promises to harmonize private advantage and public interest by insisting that wealth and status must be earned through accomplishment. Together, these ideals aspire to unite all of society behind a shared vision of hard work, skill, and deserved reward. But meritocracy no longer operates as promised. Today, middle-class children lose out to rich children at school, and middle-class adults lose out to elite graduates at work. Meritocracy blocks the middle class from opportunity. Then it blames those who lose a competition for income and status that, even when everyone plays by the rules, only the rich can win. Meritocracy harms the elite as well. Meritocratic schooling requires rich parents to invest thousands of hours and millions of dollars to get elite educations for their children. And meritocratic jobs require elite adults to work with grinding intensity, ruthlessly exploiting their educations in order to extract a return from these investments. Meritocracy entices an anxious and inauthentic elite into a pitiless, lifelong contest to secure income and status through its own excessive industry. Finally, meritocracy now divides the elite from the middle class. It drives the middle class to resent the establishment and seduces the elite to cling to the corrupt prerogatives of caste. Meritocracy ensnares the society that both classes must share in a maelstrom of recrimination, disrespect, and dysfunction. Meritocracy's charisma disguises all these harms, making it difficult to accept, indeed seriously to consider, that meritocracy itself lies behind them. Even the angriest critics of the age embrace the meritocratic ideal. They charge that corrupt elites only pretend to reward achievement, but actually favor their own. By indicting individual bad actors for failing to honor a meritocratic ideal in practice, they reaffirm meritocracy in principle. But, in fact, social and economic structures, rather than personal vices, cause the disaffection and discord that increasingly overwhelm American life. Whatever its original purposes and early triumphs, meritocracy now concentrates advantage and sustains toxic inequalities. And the taproot of all these troubles is not too little, but rather too much meritocracy. Merit itself has become a counterfeit virtue, a false idol. And meritocracy, formerly benevolent and just, has become what it was invented to combat. A mechanism for the concentration and dynastic transmission of wealth and privilege across generations. A caste order that breeds rancor and division. A new aristocracy, even. Meritocracy's false promises. I am a meritocrat, a product and now an agent of the constellation of forces that these pages lay bare. In the summer of 1987, as meritocracy gathered steam, I graduated from a public high school in Austin, Texas, and headed northeast to attend Yale College. I then spent nearly 15 years studying at various universities. the London School of Economics, the University of Oxford, Harvard University, and finally, Yale Law School, picking up a string of degrees along the way. Today, I teach at Yale Law School, where my students unnervingly resemble my younger self. They are overwhelmingly products of professional parents and high-class universities. I pass on to them the advantages that my own teachers earlier bestowed on me. In all these ways, I owe my prosperity and my caste to elite institutions and to the training and employment that they confer. Now at full flourish, meritocracy flies its flag conspicuously over the institutions that collectively ordain the elite. Harvard University, for example, calls itself a haven for the world's most ambitious scholars, and Harvard's mission statement adds that its purpose is not simply academic excellence, but also to educate the citizens and citizen leaders for our society, so that they might learn how they can best serve the world. The firms that dominate employment among graduates of Harvard and other top schools carry the same arguments into the elite's adult life. Goldman Sachs has been called probably the most elite work society ever to be assembled on the globe, and the firm's website advertises the progress that it promotes far outside the elite, for example, by brokering investments that spark a renaissance in Newark, New Jersey, and a resurgence in New Orleans. This familiar script, repeated again and again, simultaneously trumpets the elite's exceptional talent and reconciles hierarchy to the moral imperatives of democratic life, by connecting elites to the common interest as midwives to general prosperity. These promises mark a revolution. Once, aristocrats got status by birthright, based on race or breeding, and abused undeserved privilege to hoard unjust advantage. Today, meritocrats claim to win their status through talent and effort, to get ahead fair and square, using means open to anyone. Once, lazy aristocrats produced little or nothing at all. They lived lavishly by exploiting other people's labor. Today, hard-working meritocrats claim to pull their weight, insisting that their enormous accomplishments contribute fair value to the societies they lead. Earlier hierarchies were malign and offensive, but meritocracy claims to be wholesome, both just and benevolent. True to its Latin etymology, meritocracy glorifies only earned advantage and promises to transform the elite to suit a democratic age, to redeem the very idea of hierarchy. Meritocracy's rituals reinforce these ideals by making them concrete and accessible, bringing the idea of deserved advantage to life. The graduation ceremonies that have become part of the rhythm of the American summer show how this works. At Yale Law School, a commencement spans 2 splendid days. Luminaries, including Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Sonia Sotomayor, exhort graduates to follow their passions and to deploy their talents for the greater good. Professors dress in brightly colored caps and gowns made of wool, silk, and even fur. University officers wear bejeweled collars and carry ceremonial maces. A former dean dons the sumptuous costume of an honorary doctor of laws awarded at Bologna, the oldest continuously operating university in Europe. These celebrations are neither wanton nor casual. Instead, like weddings, they promote serious purposes and carry profound meanings, both political and personal. The speeches reaffirm the meritocratic elite's service to the common good. The medieval pageantry invests meritocracy with the remaining inherited allure of the aristocratic hierarchies that it displaces, looking back in order to reach forward, repurposing old bottles to carry new wine. In a Gothic quad, as shadows lengthen across the summer afternoon, history feels present and alive. The university appears as a smooth band, stretching unbroken across the generations. Commencements connect a timeless past seamlessly to an inevitable future, absorbing the strains of transition and reassuring graduates who stand at the threshold of adulthood. Rituals render the future familiar even before it arrives. They entrench meritocracy into the master narrative of modern life. Meritocracy speaks in terms and settings so consistent that they fashion a distinctive language, repeated across contexts, again and again, a form of life familiar to every citizen of the age. This gives meritocracy an enormously powerful charisma. Meritocracy's luster captivates the imagination and arrests the gaze to suppress critical judgment and stifle reform. By identifying itself with basic decency and insinuating itself into the assumed background of everyday experience, meritocracy conceals the harms that it now imposes on all who encounter it. Indeed, it makes alternative ways of awarding advantage seem absurd, unfair, or corrupt, as when privilege is apportioned through prejudice or nepotism, or simply foolish, as if high positions might be assigned by lot. But as meritocracy advances, its achievements impose a new and oppressive hierarchy, unrecognizable even a generation ago. An unprecedented and distinctively meritocratic inequality tarnishes a new gilded age. Elites increasingly monopolize not just income, wealth, and power, but also industry, public honor, and private esteem. Meritocracy comprehensively excludes the middle class from social and economic advantage, and at the same time conscripts its elite into a ruinous contest to preserve caste. Meritocratic inequality, the growing gap between the rich and the rest, bends America to an ominous arc. As meritocratic inequality grows and meritocracy's burdens increase, its moral claims falter and its rituals lose their power. The meritocratic code's grip over the imagination wears off, and resistance to its dogmas builds. Familiar bromides about earning advantage by promoting the general interest become unconvincing, and the rhythms of the past no longer soothe. Instead, discontent over meritocratic inequality provides fertile ground for critical ideas. Most important is the idea that the afflictions that dominate American life arise not because meritocracy is imperfectly realized, but rather on account of meritocracy itself. How meritocracy oppresses the middle class and exploits the elite. Meritocratic competition expels middle-class Americans from the charismatic center of economic and social life, and estranges them from the touchstones by which society measures and awards distinction, honor, and wealth. Although meritocratic energy, ambition, and innovation have transformed the mainstream of human history, meritocracy concentrates these vibrant wellsprings of creativity in a narrower and narrower elite, farther and farther beyond the practical and even the imaginative horizons of the broad middle class. Meritocracy makes the Ivy League, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street into arenas for elite ambition. Innovators in these places can remake the life world, transforming the internet at Stanford and Google, social media at Harvard and Facebook, finance at Princeton and Wall Street generally, and 1,000 other smaller domains. But a middle-class child, consigned to the backwaters of the meritocratic order, will more likely be buffeted by the next great invention than build it. Meritocracy banishes the majority of citizens to the margins of their own society, consigning middle-class children to lackluster schools and middle-class adults to dead-end jobs. Common usage often conflates meritocracy with equality of opportunity. But although meritocracy was embraced as the handmaiden of equality of opportunity and did open up the elite in its early years, it now more nearly stifles than fosters social mobility. The avenues that once carried people from modest circumstances into the American elite are narrowing dramatically. Middle-class families cannot afford the elaborate schooling that rich families buy, and ordinary schools lag farther and farther behind elite ones, commanding fewer resources and delivering inferior educations. Even as top universities emphasize achievement rather than breeding, they run admissions competitions that students from middle-class backgrounds cannot win, and their student bodies skew dramatically toward wealth. Meritocratic education now predominantly serves an elite caste rather than the general public. Meritocracy similarly transforms jobs to favor the super-educated graduates that elite universities produce so that work extends and compounds inequalities produced in school. Competence and an honest work ethic no longer assure a good job. Middle-class workers without elite degrees face discrimination all across a labor market that increasingly privileges elaborate education and extravagant training. Meritocratic exclusion reaches opportunities as well as outcomes, and meritocratic values add a moral insult to these material injuries. Even as it denies the middle class real opportunities for excellent schooling and meaningful work, meritocracy makes achievement in school and at work into the soul of honor. Meritocracy therefore frustrates efforts to satisfy the very standards that it announces, ensuring that most people will not measure up. Americans outside the elite know all this, and the dynamism in the elite only emphasizes listless wariness among the middle class. Even where material conditions remain tolerable, meritocratic inequality consigns the spiritual life of the middle class to an unbeatable, slow, devastating decline. Meritocracy also no longer truly serves even the elite that it appears to privilege. It concentrates training and work that were once spread evenly across society onto an elite that is literally too narrow to carry their weight. The same forces that deplete the middle class overburden the elite. Aristocrats were born, but meritocrats must be made. The old hereditary elite bequeathed its caste effortlessly to its children by birthright. Each new generation of aristocrats assumed its titles and great houses automatically on the death of the old. Meritocracy, by contrast, requires families who wish to transmit caste down through their generations continually to build and rebuild privilege, as each generation must reestablish its eliteness afresh by its own accomplishments. Meritocrats achieve this by raising children in a distinctive way, whereas aristocrats lacked both the inclination and the capacity to train their children. Meritocrats, especially women who sacrifice their own careers to do the work of meritocratic motherhood, increasingly devote their wealth and also their skills and energies to educating their children. Rich children devote their days to absorbing this education. For fully a third of their lives, beginning at birth and extending deep into adulthood, children of rich parents benefit from and suffer through a training regimen whose planned intensity and ruthless demands would be unrecognizable to their middle-class counterparts today, or indeed to their own grandparents a half-century ago. The framers of the U.S. Constitution required presidents to be at least 35 years old in order to ensure that only experienced adults would hold the office. Today, a 35-year-old meritocrat can easily still be in school. Elites grow more vividly strained as meritocracy matures. And today, even those at the top are beginning to turn against the intense, competitive training that makes them. The millennial generation, the first to have lived entirely inside the mature meritocracy, appreciates these burdens most keenly. Elite millennials can be precious and fragile, but not in the manner of the special snowflakes that derisive polemics describe. They do not melt or wilt at every challenge to their privilege, so much as shatter under the intense competitive pressures to achieve that dominate their lives. Let me read that sentence again. They do not wilt or melt at every challenge to their privilege, so much as shatter under the intense competitive pressures to achieve that dominate their lives. They are neither dissolute nor decadent, but rather tense and exhausted. They are also increasingly self-aware. My students at Yale, the poster children for meritocracy, are more nearly overwhelmed and confounded by their apparent blessings than complacent or even just self-assured. They seek meaning that eludes their accomplishments and regard the intense education that constitutes their elevated caste with a diffidence that approaches despair. The vast majority hail from privileged families, and they recognize their overrepresentation and instinctually doubt that they deserve the advantages they enjoy. Privilege so dominates the culture of elite universities that the small minority of elite students who come from modest backgrounds form support groups of first-generation professionals in order to ease their entry into an alien society. Whoa, too real. These students have been nurtured, but also cultivated, coached, drilled, shaped, and packaged, all in an unrelenting quest to succeed at school and preserve their caste. And they scorn all this maneuvering for advantage and deride their own complicity in it. They're consumed by what a recent survey calls a collective frenzy to advance in the prestige economy that allocates income and status. My students, like their peers all across the meritocracy, are caught in a collective anxiety driven by fear of not measuring up. They doubt their past achievements and worry that the future will merely repeat a gauntlet that they have just run, only exchanging intensely competitive schools for equally competitive jobs. Even the meritocratic elite fears, inarticulately, but with good reason, that meritocracy does not promote its true flourishing, so that it will be wealthy but not well. How meritocracy divides society. Meritocracy imposes these burdens jointly and in interlocking battalions as variations on a shared theme, two phases of a single calamity. An integrated mechanism literally concentrates income and status, as meritocratic competition simultaneously excludes the middle class from credible opportunities for real advantage and press gangs elites into an excessively intense pursuit of fruitless gain. Meritocracy thereby draws the elite and the middle class, the rich and the rest, into a close but hostile embrace. Meritocratic inequality inspires the hostility, entwining the classes in misunderstandings, friction, discord, and even open warfare. Meritocracy, that is, nourishes a systematic class conflict that deforms social and political life. The middle class experiences the elite as commandeering opportunities and advantages, education and work, income and status, that once rightfully belonged to it, as imposing a shameful and therefore unpardonable exclusion. The exclusion naturally breeds resentment and mistrust directed against the ideals and institutions that meritocracy valorizes. The middle class increasingly regards elite schools, universities, and professional firms as alien places that at best indulge eccentric values and at worst impose those values on everyone else, as clubs dominated by worthless book learning, political correctness, and arrogant self-dealing. Ironically, although following a profound inner logic, these resentments, born of exclusion, often focus on the forms of inclusion that meritocracy exalts, including, in particular, as in complaints about political correctness, the meritocratic embrace of a multicultural elite. The resentments, moreover, have direct and powerful, even world-changing consequences. They enabled Donald Trump to become president of a wealthy, powerful, and famously optimistic nation by relentlessly attacking the status quo, repudiating what he calls the establishment, and blaming the state of the country on a corrupt alliance of meritocratic elites and cultural outsiders. Trump's dark vision replaces the American dream with what is apocalyptic inaugural address, painting a nation in deep decline, overrun by poverty, crime, and economic decay, called This American Carnage. His imaginative world and express language, America first, evoke the frustration and anger of the Great Depression at home, and abroad of nations devastated by economic crisis and humiliating defeat in total war. A powerful and prosperous society does not typically behave like one laid low by defeat and humiliation. Meritocratic inequality and the resentments that it produces explain why America did. The resentments in which Trumpism traffics and the repudiationism that it pursues express the spiritual burden of life at the bottom of the meritocratic caste order, among what Trump's inaugural address called the forgotten men and women of our country who will be forgotten no longer. These groups most thrill to Trumpism's endeavor to replace the narrative of progress that dominates conventional American politics with one of rescue, to the prospect that Trump might make America great again. Nearly two-thirds of whites without a BA reported that Trump's similarly dark and angry speech at the Republican National Convention reflected their feelings about the country. And nearly 3/5 of Trump's Republican Party believes that colleges and elites are bad for America. Meritocratic inequality and class conflict also corrupt elites, including, again ironically, in ways that enable the Trumpist politics that the same elites despise. The fact that middle-class children are effectively excluded from advantage does not guarantee inclusion for rich children. And as meritocratic inequality sharpens hierarchy to a spiky fine point, even the privileged confront a precarious existence. Elites desperately fear losing caste, and their anxiety naturally isolates them and breeds condescension toward the middle class. Moreover, elites know that meritocracy favors their caste, and they suspect that, although they cannot explain how, the same forces that burnish the gloss on the elites spread a pall of gloom over the middle class. No matter how pure the motives and how scrupulous their victories, meritocratic elites are implicated, including through achievements that they admire, in inequalities that they deplore. Familiar maxims about privilege and its responsibility still propose to align meritocratic inequality with the common interest, suggesting that if only the elite would behave well, then all would be well. But as meritocracy's burdens mount and meritocratic inequality increases, these platitudes lose their power. The magnanimous triumphalism that suffused elite life in meritocracy's early years has given way to frightened and brittle arrogance. Fragile elites disdain middle-class habits and values as a defense mechanism to ward off self-doubt. Meritocrats lionize achievement, or even just distinction, and disparage ordinariness as a bulwark against rising insecurity. They cling to any attitudes and practices, ranging from the absurd food snobbery to the callous corporate right-sizing, that might confirm their merit and validate their advantage to others and, above all, to themselves. These crimped and confused attitudes further aggravate middle-class resentments, and at the same time, debilitate elites politically. To this day, elites remain too disenchanted to reimpose a sanguine version on American politics, or even to sustain it among themselves. Meritocratic discontent empowers Trump's dark populism to dominate the political imagination, even among the elites who scorn it. The Paradox of Meritocracy. Meritocracy's sparkle captures the imagination and distracts analytical attention. It dominates the self-image of the age, disabling criticism and corrupting critics. But scratch the surface to remove the sheen, and a deep well of discontent opens up below. Meritocracy's discontents present a dramatic irony so deep that it looks, from inside the meritocratic order, like a paradox. Middle-class resentment against the elite appears misguided. Today, in principle, anyone can succeed. Education has never been extravagantly funded or widely available as it is today, and even the most exclusive schools and colleges, which once admitted only white Christian men and even within this group selected students for breeding, today base admissions on academic achievement. Jobs and careers have similarly dismantled outmoded chauvinisms and are now overwhelmingly open to effort and talent. Institutions that once confronted large classes of citizens with a wall of categorical exclusion now expressly admit anyone who can make it. The anxiety felt within the elite astounds especially. The training that goes into an elite degree has never before been as excellent, and graduates have never been as accomplished. The social and economic advantages conferred by education have also never been greater. Elite graduates should be proud of their past and confident about their future status and income. Nevertheless, the complaints persist, multiply, and grow ever louder. As meritocratic inequality increases and meritocracy loses its charisma, rising elite anxieties join in older, more mature dissatisfaction, already well known to the American middle class. The grievances build because they connect lived experience to an important truth, fashioning a master key for diagnosing the troubles that dominate economic and social life today, both existentially in the individual person and politically in public life. Meritocratic inequality makes an otherwise bizarre picture of America credible and politically potent. Meritocracy's discontents invite a structural attack on the incumbent regime, grounded in a criticism of meritocracy itself. Although they appear independent and even opposed, the oppression of the middle class and the exploitation of the elite share a common root. Through diverse means and following divergent pathways, the American elite, the American middle class, and America itself are all caught in the meritocracy trap. Like all really big things, meritocracy is difficult to comprehend from up close. After 5 decades of rising economic inequality, the elite and the middle class appear, unreflectively at first blush, to inhabit separate worlds. According to the common view, there are now 2 Americas, one for the rich and the other for the rest. The loudest voices, on the left as well as the right, insist that the country, in economics, in politics, and even in social life, is coming apart. A step back opens a wider perspective and reveals that the common view is mistaken. The elite and the middle class are not coming apart at all. Instead, the rich and the rest are entangled in a single shared and mutually destructive economic and social logic. Their seemingly opposite burdens are in fact 2 symptoms of a shared meritocratic disease. Meritocratic elites acquire their caste through processes that ruthlessly exclude most Americans and, at the same time, mercilessly assault those who do go through them. Powerfully felt but unexplained frustrations that mar both classes, unprecedented resentment among the middle class and an inscrutable anxiety among the elite, are eddies in a shared stream, drawing their energies from a single current. The meritocracy trap begins in the manner of a doctor encountering a new disease, simply by setting out the symptoms of advanced meritocracy. Part 1, therefore, chronicles meritocracy's discontents and reports on the human costs of a caste hierarchy that simultaneously excludes most people and damages the few that it admits. The account aspires empathetically to describe the facts of life under meritocratic inequality and the sentiments that these facts unleash, so that people across the meritocratic divide will recognize their lived experience and respond, yes, this is how things are for us. Because meritocracy's charisma disguises its evils, and thereby bewilders those who suffer its frustrations, recognition begins to bring release. The release provides relief, even when newfound wisdom recommends uncomfortable self-examination and poignant self-reproach. Next, Part 2 describes in detail how meritocracy works. This effort explains the social and economic arrangements concerning income, education, and work that meritocracy puts in place. It chronicles the means by which meritocratic developments have produced a vastly unequal distribution of advantage, and exposes the mechanisms by which the ensuing inequality harms both the middle class and the elite. The argument shows at each step that these inequalities and burdens arise not on account of deviations or retreats from meritocracy, but rather directly because of meritocracy's successes on account of its consummation. The inner movements of the meritocratic machine reveal the construction of the meritocracy trap. Finally, Part 3 unmasks meritocracy to expose a new form of aristocracy. Aristocracy, purpose-built for a world in which the greatest source of income and wealth is not land, but labor. Meritocracy claims to be fair and benevolent, to align private interest and the common good, and to promote freedom and opportunity for all. In fact, however, meritocratic social and economic inequality betrays the values that meritocracy's stated principles endorse and that its rituals extol. Like aristocracy once did, meritocratic inequality now comprehensively organizes the lives of people caught inside it. And like aristocracy, Meritocratic inequality establishes a durable, self-sustaining hierarchy, supported by feedback loops between meritocracy's moving parts. Merit itself is not a genuine excellence, but rather, like the false virtues that aristocrats trumpeted in the ancien regimes. That must be French or something. I don't know how to say that. A pretense constructed to rationalize an unjust distribution of advantage. Escaping the meritocracy trap. The meritocracy trap was conceived inside meritocracy's institutional machinery. Indeed, in one of the rituals that shore up meritocracy's charisma, and it is steeped in all the complexities and ironies that meritocracy invites. In May 2015, 1 month before Donald Trump descended into his lobby to announce that he would run for president, the graduating class at Yale Law School asked me to deliver its commencement address. Like many others, I had been thinking about economic inequality, and so I determined to contrast the bloated opulence that elite graduates inherit with the diminished and devalued portion allotted to the rest of America. I had in mind to confront the graduates with a conventional morality tale, a stern warning against temptations to exploit their degrees for narrowly private gain, combined with a pious invocation to serve the public good. But as I sat down to write and imagined actually speaking to students I knew, whose undoubted privileges produced afflictions alongside advantages, the righteous impulse deserted me, to be replaced by something stranger, a curious amalgam of powerful empathy and sinister foreboding. Although I could not then see through meritocracy's paradoxes to resolve them, a new emotional posture and organizing frame for my remarks emerged. People are more benign than the common view supposes, but circumstances are much more malignant. The pieties embraced by meritocracy's champions and the sanctimonious anger wielded by inequality's critics both misjudge the challenges that we face. Our anxieties concerning meritocracy and economic inequality are warranted, but they cannot be resolved by identifying villains or even righting clear wrongs. Rather, they reflect a deep and pervasive dysfunction in how we structure and reward training and work, how, in a basic and immediate way, we live our lives. This diagnosis attacks no one, but it should discomfit everybody. The diagnosis, although uncomfortable, also kindles hope for a cure. We are trained to think of economic inequality as presenting a zero-sum game, to suppose that redistribution to benefit the bottom must burden the top. But this is not the case. Meritocratic inequality does not in fact serve anyone well, and escaping the meritocracy trap would therefore benefit virtually everyone. Emancipation from meritocracy would restore middle-class Americans, now cut off from dignity and prosperity, to full participation in social and economic life. Emancipation would invite the elite, now entangled in strained self-exploitation, to trade a diminution in wealth and status that it can easily afford in exchange for a precious increase in leisure and liberty, a reclaiming of an authentic self. And emancipation would heal a society that meritocracy has made oppressive and mistrustful. The problem remains how practically to escape the meritocracy trap. How to broker the politics and design the policies required to reestablish a democratic social and economic order. This is no easy task. If the book's diagnosis is correct, then meritocratic inequality stems from economic and social forces whose depth and power resemble those at play as industrial capitalism displaced feudal agriculture 2 centuries ago. And if a time traveler could explain to a well-meaning English king or prime minister in 1800 that, by 1860, the forces of industrialization would so disrupt the social order and generate such inequality as to drive the life expectancy of a child born in urban Manchester down to levels not seen since the Black Death, there would quite possibly have been no way to stop the decline. Nevertheless, we are more self-aware and more effectual than past generations. We come to understand that meritocratic inequality produces near universal harm, then we can muster the political will to cure it. If we can muster the political will, we enjoy more degrees of policy-making freedom and a greater capacity to influence events. The book proceeds from the faith that political understanding concerning structural forces rather than just moralistic recriminations is a necessary condition for intelligent and effective action. It aspires to leverage understanding into a politically potent force for change, and also to propose concrete policies that will reclaim a more equal, democratic, economic, and social order. These hopes invoke virtues, clarity of mind, and the capacity to convert understanding into effective action that are themselves commonly associated with meritocracy. And there is no contradiction in thinking that meritocracy might solve its own problem, unlock its own trap, to recover its original democratic promise and refashion an open, fair society whose elite does well by promoting the public good. On the other hand, a hope is not a plan. To escape the meritocracy trap, politics must overcome all the vulnerabilities and bad incentives that meritocracy enshrines in public life. Both the rich and the rest must learn to see through the anxieties, from populist and nativist resentment through small-minded competitiveness and arrogant condescension that currently divide them. Both classes must recognize that their distresses and even their antagonisms share in meritocracy a single source, and both classes must join in a coalition in which each eases its own afflictions by empathizing with and even shouldering the meritocratic burdens that now afflict the other. Even where everyone would benefit from democratic renewal, achieving this coalition requires self-disciplined imagination. But meritocracy's discontents leave the virtues that this generous and redemptive politics demands in short supply. Moreover, anxiety and bitterness block both the rich and the rest from recognizing that more immediately alluring alternatives merely seed a gathering storm. A very different coalition of manipulative oligarchs and resentful populists now threatens to repudiate meritocracy wholesale and to erect something considerably darker in its stead. Blindness to this risk, on display when an uncomprehending America enabled Donald Trump's rise, would constitute meritocracy's final irony.